Hey everyone, this week I'll be doing an art study from a photo of one of my favorite cosplayers. So I'll be trying to understand the anatomy of what's happening, as well as trying to work in some backgrounds, as if you've seen in my previous videos, my backgrounds are not very good. So let's look at what we're going to be doing. So I'm using a photo from one of my favorite cosplayers. Their name's Hakken. I'll put them down in the comments below. So this photo I found to be pretty interesting and a sort of simple pose that I could work with. So for the study, I would trace over the photo using some basic shapes for me to understand what's happening. And I moved it out of the way and looked at these shapes that I made and tried to replicate it on a blank layer. So if you can see over here, this is the comparison between the trace and the redraw that I did. So in case anyone's like, oh no, you traced. No, I referenced what I traced before. I looked at that, tried to understand the shapes, and tried to follow along with the drawing. And so what you're seeing here and previously as well is just me doing my final trace of the sketch that I'll have before I add in some colors and some background. Here's what it looked like at the end, and let's start with colors. One of my main issues is working with backgrounds. I always stress and leave it towards the end, and at the end I don't know what to do. So because I had a background for this one, I started off with that first just to get in some colors or some placements of where things would be, such as the rails, the pole, and the houses. So after I had that in, I hid all those layers so it would be easier for me to see, and I started putting in my base colors. So that's me here doing this. So when I put in my base colors, I like to put in different elements on different layers. So for example, the hair, the skin tone colors, and for example, the dress shirt for this, then the sweater, those would all be on different layers. So what I'm doing here is kind of like outlining that and using the fill tool or the bucket tool, so I don't actually have to color in each part by hand. One issue that I always come across is that when I do use this fill bucket, that the lines or the parts towards the lines that I drew, they actually leave white spaces, so I'll have to go over those again before adding my shading and my highlights. Throughout the speed paint, you can see me opening or using the different layer functions and moving them around just so the right ones are on top or beneath each other. And if you want a better understanding of layers, I do have a video about that I could link in the cards up here. So one new thing that I like to do is to put all my base colors and create like a little art palette or color palette of my base colors. So this helps me throughout the process if I need to refer to what my base colors were, or just to see if the colors made sense around each other. So looking at that, I had tweaked some colors such as the hair or the hues of the shirt just so things seemed more cohesive and would look nicer together. So here I'm doing my shadows and my highlights. I usually like to start off with my shadows first on the hair, skin tone, clothes, and then I'll go back into my layers and I'll do the highlights. After that, I'll go back over to do more shadows, so like darker or just finding more places where I left out the shadows or the highlights, just to create more contrast, because I feel in my pieces I'm a bit too scared to make this contrast, but it might be better if I do that. So let's see how that goes. And coming up, like I mentioned before, there's me going over the darker or the brighter spots that I think could have some more contrast, just make the piece have more depth to it. Also forgot to add in those little patterns on the vest, so I decided to add that in here on the sketch layer that I had. And here I decided to start working on the background, so the first thing I did was flip the canvas horizontally just to see if the angles looked right on both sides, added some details to the pole because that was like the main thing that I looked at first, then some contrast on the ground, and try to add some details on things like the edge of the street or the houses and added in some shadows. So the light on the buildings and the doors are kind of hard for me to figure out. As we can see, I changed it quite a bit, and I actually changed it, used the door from a different house that she had in her reference photo. I photo bashed a bit here using a pavement texture and worked on the details of the trees or the plants here. The green there is really nice. It actually pops out quite a lot in this piece. And I blurred out the background where we see the houses in the light just because I wasn't really sure how to do it. It looked too cartoonish there. I added in some lines for the street and the crosswalk as well. And with that, we are done the piece.